Hey guys! So today we are going to answer a subscriber question, and the question in question is, Frederick, when is the good idea to make a progressive web application? So let's get into it. Well, you may have heard about progressive web applications because they are one of the buzziest buzzwords that there are right now. Well, at least from what I can see. And to just give you a bit of context, a progressive web application, most people will argue back and forth what it actually means, but in essence what it allows you to do is, well, let's just summarize it to be this. It is a web application that allows you to go offline. It is something that allows you to progressively enhance the experience, if you will. And some people will claim that hey, JavaScript is optional, and some people claim that it's that you use service workers, etc., etc., etc. And I will go with the definition that, all right, you are using a service worker of some sort. Now, the benefit of having this optional network where you basically build a web application in the same manner as if you were to build a desktop application, because that is in essence what you're doing. You're creating an application that has the network as an optional thing, which, as you can imagine, is quite powerful, because that means that a user can actually install your web application onto their phone if you use the manifest file or something of that nature, and have it as any app. And basically when they need the network, you can go to the network if it is available. Now this is extremely powerful. However, the question is, when do you actually want to do this? Well, if you listen to Google, they think that you should use it for absolutely everything. Well, I won't go that far, but it feels that way, because that's usually how people who push technology, like, that's how they talk. Usually, I mean, if you want to be a salesperson, you can't sell something. You can't make a half-assed job. You have to sell things as if it's a gift from God or something of that nature. And although I think that I personally, if we're just going to get that out of the way as well, I personally think that progressive web applications is a very, very interesting topic, and I think it has the potential to basically I honestly believe that we are right now experiencing the first baby steps towards a completely new way of doing web work. That's just my 2 cents on it. Opinionated stuff out of the way for now. But if we are going to say, when would it make sense today to use it? I would argue that making the network optional is something that you should not take lightly. The reason why is because it adds quite a lot of complexity to your application if you want to really leverage this sort of thing. It creates another permutation when you're doing your validation and doing your testing. Because think about it this way. If you make the assumption, and that's the beautiful thing about assumptions, because if you make an assumption and you say, this is how the world is going, well, this is the way that things are going to work. If it doesn't work this way, we simply fail. The beautiful part about failing is that you don't have to test have a continuation process for what happens if something goes down. And for testing, that is very nice, because the more permutations you have, the more cases you need to cover, the longer your development process is going to take. So making the network optional should be a very carefully weighed off thing that you do. Now, I will argue that the best thing for you is to ask yourself whether or not your application fills a offline value. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I will state this to you. Some people will go, and I've had this discussion with some of my coworkers where I remember this one time we had a live chat application that we were implementing, and one of my coworkers said that, but I want to solve this problem. What happens if the network goes down when a person is in our help center live chat with one of our coworkers? And I said, do you really need to cover that? And he's like, that's of course we should do that. And I go, but think about that just for a moment. So what you're saying is that we should spend, because it takes a lot of effort to maintain this and to implement it. So we are going to implement a feature that gives us the network as an optional thing, for a feature which is the help center, which ideally shouldn't even exist. I mean, in a perfect world, the help center and like these help chats shouldn't, this is impossible, of course, but ideally your application should be so intuitive and so amazing that nobody actually needs that feature. So you're going to implement this feature and put most likely quite a few days of work, maybe even over a week of work into this, and then maintaining it, because now it needs to be included in all of our permutation tests, like our regression tests and all that good stuff. So you're going to add that for the unlikely event that a person who is in the middle of getting tech support from one of our staff here, like that they will go through a tunnel or something, that the network will for some reason go down in a product that is marketed towards a region of the world where there isn't really much of a problem with flaky network connections. That is your case. That, I will argue, if we look at those numbers, how many people have actually lost connections during a live chat in this manner, I mean, I'm thinking that this will be a fraction of our total user base. And what's even worse is that it doesn't really feel much value, because the person can't, although you can keep on chatting and still use the live chat, nobody's going to answer you, and that's the value that you are going for. And that's the thing I want you to take away from this. I will argue that progressive web applications, although they have a really strong use case for cached material, say that you have a flow of a news flow or something, there's absolutely a value in being able to go to a landing page and see something even if the network isn't there, and then be notified when the network comes back so that you can click something and, you know, the page refreshes or whatever, or you load in more data. But I think that that's the most general and objective thing that I can say that still is fairly on the money, I would argue. Ask yourself whether or not there is a value to your application being offline. Because if all the user, like as an example, if you have, let's say, 5 products on in an e-commerce site, and the network goes down, like the user can't click in unless you have a fairly elaborate strategy for how to solve that. The user might go into something like click on a product and want to see the actual product. I mean, if the network goes down, they can still not, like they can browse maybe a few pages depending on how clever your caching strategy is, but they can't purchase anything. They cannot really take an action as part of your application. So you should really ask yourself whether or not that's a good use case. However, let's say that you are a newspaper and you have a bunch of articles which fear people, you know, you want people to be able to read your articles. That's fairly static content. It's just a consumer type of thing. It's not something that requires the user to take an action in order for you as the organization to gain a value from it necessarily. So that might be a better use case for progressive web applications. So what I want you to take away from this is that having this idea of having an optional network, I think that you should really consider whether or not that is valuable. And the same thing goes depending on your definition. If you think that JavaScript is optional, I will argue that I highly suggest that you assume that JavaScript is available unless you are making products for third world countries or places where the use case is very vastly different, because it adds a lot of complexity if you need to consider, all right, how is the application going to work if there's no Java? I mean, if there's no JavaScript, the entire way your app has to work needs to completely change pretty much. And for using optional networks, I think that you should, as I said, really, really consider whether or not there is a value in having an optional network, because some applications very depend on there being a network connection for the user to even be able to gain any value from the product. So maybe you're just overcomplicating things when you don't need to. Have a great day.